Arrow, the Arrowverse. Where did it all start? Well, it started in print with DC Comics back in the Golden Age with the debut of Green Arrow. My new essay for comic book historians talks about the second attempt to reboot Green Arrow in the classic miniseries by Mike Grell, the Longbow Hunters. Longbow Hunters, again, it's the second time. Hunters was the second attempt to reboot the character. The first was with Hard Traveling Heroes when Green Arrow teamed up with Green Lantern, but that was in the early 70s. In the mid 80s, riding on the success of The Dark Knight Returns, DC decided to take a shot with a character who, was kind of irrelevant, quite honestly. But he had that cult following from that early 70s run, even though it didn't sell. It kind of built its following over the years. In the Longbow Hunters, you see a character who was silly. The Green Arrow. Green Arrow was a silly character. It was a silly Batman ripoff that they made serious later on. There's a lot of silliness in the Silver Age too, with the comics code and concerns about censorship. The Longbow Hunters basically took a hero out of the hero universe. He's very much demystified, and he becomes like a tough guy archer who has no real superpowers. Little, you know, he's almost like the Punisher. They do. He just is at the top edge of being a superhero, but not a superhero. Although he's not as crazy as the Punisher. He becomes more of a middle-aged man struggling with a midlife crisis, and one of the ways he addresses his midlife crisis is by throwing away the trick arrows and slowly moving away from the Green Arrow persona and becoming Oliver Queen, the man behind the mask. Now, the Longbow Hunters is only 3 issues. It's not as lengthy as The Dark Knight Returns, understandably. Batman's obviously a more popular character. And with Green Arrow, I want to say Green Lantern, with Green Arrow, the series, a monthly series would start not long after the positive reception Longbow Hunters achieved. And Longbow Hunters set you up for that lengthy 5-year or so Mike Grell run, where you really get a character who's removed from the DC universe, very human stories, no supervillains, very few appearances. I think Warlord appeared. I think that might have been one of some, maybe the only one, but or very few. I can't think of too many. They were very much self-contained in this environment in Seattle, and moving him to Seattle was a further way of getting him out of the DC universe. Longbow Hunters has a nice mix of intrigue, espionage, martial arts, and by martial arts, you have the archery element of the classic martial arts, and it's kind of neat to see. And you have intrigue, you have the CIA, and you have international espionage, and a strange series of murders and all that. It's actually a very well put together, very well crafted series. And if you read my essay, I go into a bit more into the struggles that Oliver Queen faces, and his crisis of confidence and his crisis of the self. And Longbow Hunters really does typify what was great about DC Comics in the 80s and continued to be great in DC Comics into the 90s. And Marvel was quite good as well, but I think Marvel matured more in the 90s. The 80s was kind of, well, not really. Daredevil started it, but Moon Knight was also a bit more mature. But overall, Marvel was still very comic booky. DC was reinventing its characters. It had to because they were considered corny, fairly or not. I mean, DC in the 70s had some really good stuff, had some kiddie stuff, but so did Marvel. But there was a movement to make DC stories more complex, more involved, and that did start with Dark Knight Returns, Crisis on Infinite Earths, and maybe the John Byrne run on Superman, although I'm not sure what year that came out. It might have been, was it the 80s or I think it was the 80s, late 80s, mid 80s. But if you really want to see, and Green Arrow still is good. Issues and stories that came later in the later 90s and the 2000s of Green Arrow were enjoyable. But if you really want to see where this character really took off in a new direction, wow, Hard Traveling Heroes will be where it starts. But Longbow Hunters picks up on that 10 years later, publishing date-wise, in the continuity. It's been rebooted a million times. Strongly recommended. Definitely an influential work on my writing and my love of comic books. If you read Longbow Hunters, follow it up with reading the monthly series by Mike Grell, and you really will see something very unique. And you just don't see that kind of work anymore in a comic book today. Partially because a lot of that ground is not trailblazing anymore. I mean, people really broke new ground many years back and changed people's perceptions of what comic books are. You know, mainly because they moved. The kids' audience wasn't there anymore. They needed to target adults. Or by adults, I don't mean people my age, but although people my age still like it. But I think that maturing audience that wasn't so much discovering it as a kid, they were discovering it as an adolescent and then following through. And that actually kind of makes Longbow Hunters even more intriguing because he's described as 43 years old, and that's quite an older character from the audience that was buying comic books at the time. But it works, and I strongly recommend Longbow Hunters. It's available on Amazon. You can buy it, I think you can buy it ebook, you can buy it hardcover. There's all kinds of versions of it. And go to comicbookhistorians.com, and you can follow the link in the description. You can read my article. You can read some excellent articles by Alex Grand and much more.